And we are back with part two of this week's reading, actually, second reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible Tree of Life version. TLV for Waymaker Messianic Jewish and Christian Center USA. We are doing this in collaboration with the Bible study because we have reached this point in the Bible study and where this is part of the Ketuvim or the writings, and also in collaboration with the Feast of Purim, which has just begun. So we are going to continue with the book of Esther, and we are at chapter 5. And I apologize, my voice keeps coming and going. I just had done the Purim videos, and I'm trying to do this all in one night, and my voice is like kind of going tonight. It's late. It's actually about 11:30 here. So I'm gonna try to do this and get this uploaded um, tonight so that it is there for everyone. Chapter 5, Esther's Request of the King. On the third day Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. So the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? Whatever you request, even as much as half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." So Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him." The king replied, "Bring Haman quickly, so we may do what Esther said." Then the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther prepared, and they were drinking wine, and the king said to Esther, "What is your request? It will be granted to you. Whatever you request, even as much as half the kingdom, it will be fulfilled." Esther answered and said, "My petition and my request is this: if I found favor in the king's eyes, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and my request, then let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will do as the king requests." Gallows for Mordecai. Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. However, when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and he did not rise or tremble before him, Haman was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and exalted him above the other officials and servants of the king. Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me to accompany the king to a banquet that she prepared, and she has also invited me along with the king tomorrow. Yet all this does not satisfy me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, "Let them set up a gallows 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go happily with the king to the banquet." This idea delighted Haman, and he ordered the gallows to be built. Chapter 6. The king honors Mordecai. That night sleep deserted the king, so he ordered the books of the Chronicles, the records of his reign, be brought in and read before the king. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had revealed that Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the door, had conspired to kill King Ahasuerus. The king asked, "What honor or recognition has been shown to Mordecai for this?" The king's servants that attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." Then the king said, "Who is in the courtyard?" Now Haman had just come into the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servants answered, "Haman is standing in the courtyard." The king said, "Let him come in." When Haman entered, the king asked him what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor. Now Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king desire to honor rather than me?" So Haman's reply: "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be placed into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. Let them clothe the man whom the king desires to honor and parade him on horseback throughout the city streets, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for a man the king desires to honor.'" The king said to Haman, "Go quickly, take the robe and the horse, just as you suggested, for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything that you recommended." So Haman took the robe and the horse, robed, robed Mordecai, and paraded him through the city streets, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." Afterwards Mordecai then returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed to his home, grief-stricken and with his head covered. Haman recounted to his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai before whom you have begun your downfall is of Jewish descent, you won't be able to stand against him. In fact, you will certainly fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hurried Haman along to the banquet Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. Esther intercedes for her people. So the king and Haman came to dine with Queen Esther. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked Esther again, "Whatever you request, even as much as half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." So Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare the life of my people. This is my request. For we have been sold, and I and my people, for destruction, slaughter, and annihilation. If we had simply been sold as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for such distress would not be worth disturbing the king." King Ahasuerus responded to Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is the man that presumed to do this?" Esther replied, "The man, the adversary and foe, is this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Enraged, the king got up from the banquet of wine and withdrew to the palace garden. But Haman stayed behind to plead with Queen Esther for his life, for he realized that the king had determined a catastrophic end for him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the same couch where Esther was. The king exclaimed, "Will he also assault the queen while she is with me in the palace?" As soon as these words came out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "Look, a gallows 50 cubits high is standing next to Haman's house. Haman himself made it for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's rage was subsided. A decree to protect the Jews. That same day King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Then Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Esther then appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. Esther again pleading with the king, falling at his feet and weeping, she pleaded with him to stop the evil of Haman the Agagite and his plan that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before the king. She said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and it seems right to the king, and if I am pleasing in his eyes, let an edict be written rescinding the dispatches devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are throughout the king's provinces. For how can I endure seeing the disaster that will fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my relatives?" King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "I have decided to give Haman's estate to Esther, and had him hanged on the gallows because he stretched out his hand against the Jews. Now write in the king's name on behalf of the Jews what seems good to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For a decree that is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So the king's scribes were called at that time on the 23rd day of the third month of the month of Sivan. It was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to all the Jews, as well as the officials, governors, and advisors of all the 127 provinces that stretched from India to Ethiopia. To each province it was written in its own script and in its own language, and also to the Jews in their own writing and language. This decree was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed with the king's ring, and sent on horseback by couriers who rode on the king's horses, specially bred for their speed. The king granted the right for every Jew in every city to assemble themselves and to protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any army of any people or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder their possessions. The day appointed for this in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the written edict was distributed to every province and made known to the peoples of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers that rode royal horses raced out, pressed on by the king's command. The decree was also given out at the palace at Shushan. Then Mordecai went out from the king's presence in blue and white royal robes, with a large gold crown, and also a purple robe of fine linen. The city of Shushan shouted and rejoiced, for the Jews there was light and gladness, joy and honor throughout every province and throughout every city, wherever the king's edict and his law went. The Jews had gladness and joy, banquets and holidays. Many peoples of the land became Jews because the fear of the Jews had overcome them. Chapter 9. Jews defend themselves. Consequently, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month Adar, the king's edict and his law drew near to be carried out. On that day the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but contrary to expectations, the Jews gained the upper hand over those that hated them. Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus in order to lay hands on those seeking their harm. No one was able to stand against them, for fear of them had fallen on all the peoples. Even all the administrators of the provinces, the officers and governors, and those doing business for the king helped the Jews, for the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Mordecai was prominent at the palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. The man Mordecai was growing even more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with their sword, killing and destroying, and they did whatever they wished to those who hated them. In the citadel at Shushan, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people, including Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adallah, Aridatha, Harmashtha, Arasad, Aradai, and Vazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. They slew them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. On that day the number of those that were killed in the citadel at Shushan was brought to the king's attention. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in the citadel of Shushan, including Haman's 10 sons. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your request? It shall be granted to you. What other petition do you have? It shall be done. If it pleases the king, Esther said, let the Jews in Shushan be allowed to carry out today's edict, tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. The king commanded that this be done. A decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. The Jews in Shushan gathered together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Shushan, but they did not put their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered together to protect themselves and to get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested, making it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were in Shushan had assembled on the 13th, and on the 14th, and on the 15th they rested, making it a day of feasting and gladness. That is why the rural Jews, those living in unwalled villages, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a day of sending presents of food to one another. Purim festival. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, urging them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year as the days when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into celebration. These were to be days of feasting, celebration, and sending presents of food to one another and giving gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the commemoration they had begun and do what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the pur, that is the lot, to ruin and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he issued a written edict that the wicked scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. For this reason, these days were called Purim, from the word pur. Therefore, because of everything in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews established and took upon themselves, upon their descendants, and upon all who joined them, that they would commemorate these 2 days in the way prescribed and at the appointed time every year. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province and every city. These days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor their remembrance perish from their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and also Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of shalom and truth to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for themselves, and just as they had established for themselves and their descendants matters regarding their times of fasting and lamentations. Esther's command confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it is written into the records. Chapter 10. Now King Ahasuerus imposed a tribute among the entire land, even to the coastlands of the sea, all the acts of his power and might, along with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, and the story of how the king promoted him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by the multitude of his people. He sought their good and spoke their welfare of his descendants. And that is the end of the book of Esther. And there was only one footnote here for the entire book of Esther, and that was Matthew chapter 7, verse 2. For with judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. When you think of what happened to Haman and what he meant for Mordecai, it turned on his head. Well, that kind of says it all. I'm going to do a real quick recap, and I will be coming back with a part three. While the books of Ezra and Nehemiah dealt with the captives who returned from Israel from Babylon, the book of Esther is concerned with the captives that remained in Babylon, known as Persia during that time, and the number of Jews that returned to Israel was very small as compared to the numbers that chose to stay in the land of the captivity. The book of Esther was written um, by Mordecai, um, and it took place in the city of Shushan. It's also known as Susa, Susa, in some Bibles, the capital city of the Persian Empire. Well, the name, um, the central message is the providence of God, or teamwork that shaped a nation. And the book of Esther is a graphic narrative that tells the story of how God preserved his people in light of a plot to exterminate them. And in some Bibles, the King Ahasuerus, it's spelled A-A-H, I'm sorry, Ahasuerus, and some will have it actually spelled Xerxes. It's the same person. It, you know, again, Haman was from the descendants of the Amalekites, and we read that segment where Moses, um, they were in battle with the Amalekites, and that was in Ezekiel 17. Esther is a study of how God's people survived against hatred and hostility. A man named Haman, who was second in command to the king, wanted to destroy the Jews, and it all stemmed on the fact that Mordecai would not bow to him. So Mordecai was a Jew, and so he then hated all Jews. um, it's kind of he was kind of the all or nothing deal, but there was already hostility um, through the ages, and it was stated that they would have issues, and here we are again. So there was anti-Semitism that we saw here um, from chapter 1 to 5, and then God's providence overrules the crisis we see in chapter 6 to 7. So we've got the personalities of King Ahasuerus. We've got the personalities of Vashti, who just wasn't going to be pushed around. She actually, when you think about what she was refusing to do, she just didn't want to be the trophy queen, because they were drunk and she wanted no part of that. Um, and but it cost her um, the crown of the queen. And then there's Esther. Um, so she actually acted on behalf of the people. Mordecai was also very brave, in this. Then we have Haman, who was just very evil, and because he did, he had a lot of pride and didn't, you know, didn't, no, Mordecai didn't bow to him. He became angry. So Esther actually was risen up for a time when somebody needed to be bold enough to stand up for the people, and she did. To the very fact that she could have lost her own life by doing so. But God um, knew that the people were fasting and praying, and they gave it all to God. And by that same token, God did act on their behalf. God is the one who saved the people. And I'm going to close this out in prayer and then come back with an altar call. Father God, we thank you. We thank you for this beautiful book that depicts your love for your people and your salvation for your people. And we thank you in the mighty name of Yeshua. We know that you are in control, you are on the throne, and you will never leave us or forsake us as your people. And we are very grateful. We love you, we worship you, and we adore you. In the mighty name of Yeshua, Amen and Amen.